Chapter 20. Thief and Pirate. Captain Blood paced the poop of his ship alone in the tepid dusk, and the growing golden radiance of the great poop lantern, in which a seaman had just lighted the 3 lamps. About him all was peace. The signs of the day's battle had been effaced. The deck had been swabbed, and order was restored above and below. A group of men squatting about the main hatch were drowsily chanting, their hardened natures softened, perhaps, by the calm and the beauty of the night. They were the men of the larboard watch, waiting for 8 bells, which was imminent. Captain Blood did not hear them. He did not hear anything save the echo of those cruel words which had dubbed him thief and pirate. Thief and pirate! It was an odd fact of human nature that a man may for years possess the knowledge that a certain thing must be of a certain fashion, and yet be shocked to discover through his own senses that the fact is in perfect harmony with his beliefs. When first, 3 years ago at Tortuga, he had been urged upon the adventurer's course which he had followed ever since, he had known in what opinion Arabella Bishop must hold him if he succumbed. Only the conviction that already she was forever lost to him by introducing a certain desperate recklessness into his soul had supplied the final impulse to drive him upon his rover's course. That he should ever meet her again had not entered his calculations, had found no place in his dreams. They were, he conceived, irrevocably and forever parted. Yet, in spite of this, in spite even of the persuasion that to her this reflection that it was his torment could bring no regrets, he had kept the thought of her ever before him in all those wild years of filibustering. He had used it as a curb not only upon himself, but also upon those who followed him. Never had buccaneers been so rigidly held in hand, never had they been so firmly restrained, never so debarred from the excess of rapine and lust that were usual in their kind as who sailed with Captain Blood. It was, you will remember, stipulated in their articles that in these as in other matters they must submit to the commands of their leader. And because of the singular good fortune which had attended his leadership, he had been able to impose that stern condition of a discipline unknown before among buccaneers. How would not these men laugh at him now if he were to tell them that this he had done out of respect for a slip of a girl whom he had fallen romantically enamored? How would that laughter swell if he added that this girl had that day informed him that she did not number thieves and pirates among her acquaintances? Thief and pirate! How the words clung, how they stung and burnt his brain! It did not occur to him, being no psychologist, nor learned in the tortuous workings of the feminine mind, that the fact that she should bestow upon him those epithets in the very moment and circumstance of their meeting was in itself curious. He did not perceive the problem thus presented, therefore he could not probe it. Else he might have concluded that if in a moment in which, by delivering her from captivity, he deserved her gratitude, yet she expressed herself in bitterness, it must be because that bitterness was anterior to the gratitude and deep-seated. She had been moved to it by hearing of the course he had taken. Why? It was that what he did not ask himself, or some ray of light might have come to brighten his dark, his utterly evil despondency. Surely she would have never been so moved had she not cared. Had she not felt that in what he did there was a personal wrong to herself? Surely, he might have reasoned, nothing short of this could have moved her to such a degree of bitterness and scorn as that which she had displayed. That is how you will reason it. Not so, however, reasoned Captain Blood. Indeed, that night he reasoned not at all. His soul was given up to conflict between the almost sacred love he had borne her in all these years and the evil passion which she had now awakened in him. Extremes touch, and in touching may for a space become confused, indistinguishable. And the extremes of love and hate were tonight so confused in the soul of Captain Blood that in their fusion they made up a monstrous passion. thief and pirate. That was what she deemed him, without qualification, oblivious of the deep wrongs he had suffered, the desperate case in which he had found himself after his escape from Barbados, and all the rest that had gone to make him what he was. That he should have concluded his filibustering with hands as clean as were possible to a man engaged in such undertakings had also not occurred to her as a charitable thought with which to mitigate her judgment of a man she had once esteemed. She had no charity for him, no mercy. She had summed him up, convicted him, and sentenced him in that one phrase. He was thief and pirate in her eyes, nothing more, nothing less. What, then, was she? What are those who have no charity? He asked the stars. Well, as she had shaped him hitherto, so let her shape him now. Thief and pirate she had branded him. She should be justified. Thief and pirate should he prove henceforth, no more nor less, as bowelless, as remorseless, as all those others who had deserved those names. He would cast out the maudlin ideas by which he had sought to steer a course, put an end to this idiotic struggle to make the best of two worlds. She had shown him clearly to which world he belonged. Let him now justify her. She was aboard his ship, in his power, and he desired her. He laughed softly, jeeringly, as he leaned on the taffrail, looking down at the phosphorescent gleam in the ship's wake, and his own laughter startled him by its evil note. He checked suddenly and shivered. A sob broke from him to end that ribald burst of mirth. He took his face in his hands and found a chill moisture on his brows. Meanwhile, Lord Julian, who knew the feminine part of humanity rather better than Captain Blood, was engaged in solving the curious problem that had so completely escaped the buccaneer. He was spurred to it, I suspect, by certain vague stirrings of jealousy. Miss Bishop's conduct in the perils through which they had come brought him at last to perceive that a woman may lack the simpering graces of cultured femininity, and yet, because of that lack, be the more admirable. He wondered what precisely might have been her earlier relations with Captain Blood, and was conscious of a certain uneasiness which urged him now to probe the matter. His lordship's pale, dreamy eyes had, as I have said, a habit of observing things, and his wits were tolerably acute. He was blaming himself now for not having observed certain things before, or, at least, for not having studied them more closely, and he was busily connecting them with the more recent observations made that very day. He had observed, for instance, that Blood's ship was named the Arabella, and he knew that Arabella was Miss Bishop's name, and he had observed all the odd peculiarities of the meeting of Captain Blood and Miss Bishop, and the curious change that meeting had wrought in each. The lady had been monstrously uncivil to the captain. It was a very foolish attitude for a lady in her circumstances to adopt towards a man in Blood's, and his lordship could not imagine Miss Bishop as normally foolish. Yet, in spite of her rudeness, in spite of the fact that she was the niece of a man whom Blood must regard as his enemy, Miss Bishop and his lordship had been shown the utmost consideration aboard the captain's ship. A cabin had been placed at the disposal of each, to which their scanty remaining belongings and Miss Bishop's woman had been duly transferred. They were given the freedom of the great cabin, and they had sat down to table with Pitt, the master, and Wolverstone, who was Blood's lieutenant, both of whom had shown them the utmost courtesy. Also, there was the fact that Blood himself had kept almost studiously from intruding upon them. His lordship's mind went swiftly but carefully down the avenues of thought, observing and connecting. Having exhausted them, he decided to seek additional information from Miss Bishop. For this he must wait until Pitt and Wolverstone should have withdrawn. He was hardly made to wait so long, for as Pitt rose from the table to follow Wolverstone, who had already departed, Miss Bishop detained him with a question. "Mr. Pitt," she asked, "were you not one of those who escaped from Barbados with Captain Blood?" "I was. I too was one of your uncle's slaves. And have you been Captain Blood ever since? His shipmaster always, ma'am. She nodded. She was very calm and self-contained, but his lordship observed that she was unusually pale, though considering what she had that day undergone, this afforded no matter for wonder. Did you ever sail with a Frenchman named Cocosac? Cocosac! Pitt laughed. The name evoked a ridiculous memory. Aye, he was with us at Maracaibo. And another Frenchman named Levasseur? His lordship marvelled at her memory of these names. Aye, Cocosac was Levasseur's lieutenant until he died. Until who died? Levasseur. He was killed on one of the Virgin Islands 2 years ago. There was a pause. Then, in an even quieter voice than before, Miss Bishop asked, Who killed him? Pitt answered readily. There was no reason why he should not, though he began to find the catechism intriguing. Captain Blood killed him. Why? Pitt hesitated. It was not a tale for a maid's ears. They quarrelled, he said shortly. Was it about a lady? Miss Bishop relentlessly pursued him. You might put it that way. What was the lady's name? Pitt's eyebrows went up. Still he answered. Miss d'Oregon. She was the daughter of the governor of Tortuga. She had gone off with this fellow Levasseur, and Peter delivered her out of his dirty clutches. He was a black-hearted scoundrel, and deserved what Peter gave him. I see, and yet Captain Blood has not married her? Not yet, laughed Pitt, who knew the utter groundlessness of the common gossip in Tortuga, which pronounced Mademoiselle d'Oregon the captain's future wife. Miss Bishop nodded in silence, and Jeremy Pitt turned to depart, relieved that the catechism was ended. He paused in the doorway to impart a piece of information. Maybe it'll comfort you to know that the captain has altered our course for your benefit. It's his intention to put you both ashore on the coast of Jamaica, as near Port Royal as we dare venture. We've gone about, and if the wind holds, you'll soon be home again, mistress. Vastly obliging of him, drawled his lordship, seeing that Miss Bishop made no shift to answer. Sombre-eyed, she sat, staring into vacancy. Indeed, ye may say so, said Pitt agreed. He's taking risks that few of us would take in his place, but that's always been his way. He went out, leaving his lordship pensive, those dreamy blue eyes of his intently studying Miss Bishop's face, for all the dreaminess, his mind increasingly uneasy. At length, Miss Bishop looked at him and spoke. Your Cocosac told no more than the truth, it seems. I perceive that you were testing it, said his lordship. I am wondering precisely why. Receiving no answer, he continued to observe her silently, his long tapering fingers toying with a ringlet of the golden periwig in which his long face was set. Miss Bishop sat bemused, her brows knit, her brooding glance seeming to study the fine Spanish point that edged the tablecloth. At last his lordship broke the silence. He amazes me, this man, said he in his slow, languid voice that never seemed to change its level. That he should alter his course for us is in itself a matter for wonder, but that he should take a risk on our behalf, that he should venture into Jamaican waters, it amazes me, as I have said. Miss Bishop raised her eyes and looked at him. She appeared to be very thoughtful. Then her lips flickered curiously, almost scornfully. It seemed to him her slender fingers drummed the table. What is still more amazing is that he does not hold us ransom, she said at last. It's what you deserve. Oh, and why, if you please? For speaking to him as you did. I usually call things by their names. Do you? Stab me. I shouldn't boast of it. It argues either extreme youth or extreme foolishness. His lordship, you see, belonged to my Lord Sunderland's school of philosophy. He added after a moment, Does this display of ingratitude? A faint colour stirred in her cheeks. Your lordship is evidently aggrieved with me. I am disconsolate. I hope your lordship's grievance is sounder than your views of life. It is news to me that ingratitude is the fault only to be found in the young and the foolish. I didn't say so, madam. There was a tartness in his tone, evoked by the tartness she had used. "If you would do me the honour to listen, you would not misapprehend me. For, if, unlike you, I do not always say precisely what I think, at least I say precisely what I wish to convey. To be ungrateful may be human, but to display it is childish." I I don't think I understand." Her brows were knit. "How have I been ungrateful? And to whom?" "To whom? To Captain Blood. Didn't he come to our rescue?" "Did he?" Her manner was frigid. "I wasn't aware that he knew of our presence aboard the Milagrosa." His lordship permitted himself the slightest gesture of impatience. "You are probably aware that he delivered us," he said. "And living as you have done in these savage places of the world, you can hardly fail to be aware that this is known even in England, that this fellow Blood strictly confines himself to making war upon the Spaniards, so that to call him a thief and pirate as you did was to overstate the case against him, at a time when it would have been more prudent to have understated it." "Prudence?" Her voice was scornful. "What have I to do with prudence?" "Nothing, as I perceive. But at least study generosity. I tell you frankly, ma'am, that in Blood's place I should never have been so nice. Sink me! When you consider what he has suffered at the hands of his fellow countrymen, you may marvel with me that he should trouble to discriminate between Spanish and English, to be sold into slavery. Ugh!" His lordship shuddered. "And to a damned colonial planter." He checked abruptly. I beg your pardon, Miss Bishop. For the moment, you were carried away by your heat in defense of this sea robber." Miss Bishop's scorn was almost fierce. His lordship stared at her again. Then he half closed his large pale eyes and tilted his head a little. "I wonder why you hate him so," he said softly. He saw the sudden scarlet flame upon her cheeks, the heavy frown that descended upon her brow. He had made her very angry, he judged, but there was no explosion. She recovered. "Hate him? Lord, what a thought! I don't regard the fellow at all." "Then you should, ma'am." His lordship spoke his thoughts frankly. "He's worth regarding. He'll be an acquisition to the King's Navy, a man that can do the things he did this morning. His service under Rigueur wasn't wasted on him. That was a great seaman, and, blister me, the pupil's worthy the master if I am judge of anything. I doubt if the Royal Navy can show his equal. To thrust himself deliberately between those two at the point-blank range and so turn the tables on them, it asks courage, resource, and invention. And we landlubbers were not the only ones he tricked by his maneuver. That Spanish admiral never guessed the intent until it was too late, and Blood held him in check. A great man, Miss Bishop, a man worth regarding." Miss Bishop was moved to sarcasm. "You should use your influence with my Lord Sunderland to have the king offer him a commission." His lordship laughed softly. "Faith, it's done already. I have his commission in my pocket." And he increased her amazement by a brief exposition of the circumstances. In that amazement he left her, and went in quest of Blood. But he was still intrigued. If she were a little less uncompromising in her attitude towards Blood, his lordship would have been happier.